Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So the talk I gave before the meal was a bit on cultivating the brahmaviharas and meditation. And I thought it'd be useful to talk about how we bring these two off the cushion, how we apply them to our lives in general, and the skillful means for changing on a daily basis our relationship to those around us and to our lives, to one of giving and blessings, as opposed to feeding and dependency. And the Buddha gave a variety of techniques and recollections and qualities to look towards around the path that I think aren't utilized as much as they could be in the West. And we appreciate the teachings on meditation and wisdom, and sometimes we forget the robust backdrop that creates the conditions for the heart to become truly wealthy, in the sense of having the brahmaviharas, these qualities of loving kindness deeply embedded in it. So one list that the commentaries come up with are the list of the 10 paramitas, or spiritual perfections. And they begin with dana, giving; sila, which is morality, ethics; nekkhamma, which is renunciation; and move on through wisdom, effort, and so on through, in the end, metta, loving kindness, and then upekkha, equanimity at the end. And so often we love the high teachings on metta and upekkha, these sort of refined qualities at the end of this list. And it's not as if we have to cultivate the 10 paramitas in order of how they appear. And yet, I think there's a reason that they appear in that order. And dana, giving, being the first, is a profoundly powerful practice that you see manifest in cultures such as Thailand in a way that's truly beautiful. And in Thailand, monastics in the village areas will walk for alms every morning, and from the age of 2 or 3 months old, children will be taken out by their mothers and their hands guided in putting, balls of rice into the monastics' bowls. And it's a great thing to train someone in terms of, from an early age, to know to give, and that's a joyful experience, and that it's an experience of wealth at its most basis. Because when I, as a Westerner raised in an affluent society, go to one of these Isan villages and receive, a clump of rice, a sticky rice from one of their hands, who's wealthy then? And for that moment, that's the experience of wealth. It's saying, I have enough, and here's some more. I have enough to give some. And in that moment, someone is wealthy in a deep sense. And this is obviously not to take away from or look over the difficult conditions in many of these places, but rather to say that we can be extremely wealthy, and if we never give, then in a sense we are always impoverished. And I was struck by, when we went to Seattle, we could have rented a place right away in the city for our Saturday gatherings, but instead we chose to sort of go to meet all these spiritual communities and talk with the pastors and the reverends about their spiritual lives and practices, and just depend on generosity, because it's the Buddhist way. And it took a little longer, but the generosity manifested, and church after church offered their space to us for nothing, as just a gift. And the first one to do this was named Fauntleroy Church, and we went there and had our day-long retreat. And before that, we went to one of the pastor's sermons, and she was speaking about the story of the loaves and fishes, the feast story, and reflecting, and I didn't know this, well, for those who, I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's, Jesus calls his disciples and says to invite a feast, a great crowd, a multitude, and the disciples, in a mindset of scarcity, say, we don't have enough food for all these people, and Jesus says, it's okay, we'll provide. And then the loaves and the fishes multiply, and there's enough. And the pastor is recollecting that, whereas the story of, say, the crucifixion and the rebirth, or the resurrection, only occurs, say, twice or three times in the Gospels, the story of the feast occurs 6 times. 6 times. And the idea maybe being that this direction to look to the feast of this plenitude that we find ourselves in, if we know to give and can really approach life with that mindset, is an unbelievably powerful attitude to take, and allows us to feel wealthy in a deep sense. And Ajahn Nisabho reflects that sort of the first real act of choice one has is one's first act of giving. That's the first real act of free will one gets in life, because it's a moment where you completely of your own accord really give and give up. And it's a powerful means of giving up the self, or this attachment to the self. So giving is essential, and the Buddha, said that if beings only knew, as I know, the fruits of giving, they would never have eaten before they had given, not even if there was their last mouthful of food. But because beings do not know, as I know, the fruits of giving, stinginess overcomes their minds. They eat without having given. And he tells us monks, even if you have some crumbs of rice in the bottom of your bowl, if you dump them into the woods with the intention that may the beings here have something to eat, then that's great merit for you. And I lived with one sort of hidden teacher, a hidden meditation master in Thailand, who after the meal he'd sort of go out with some bread and feed the little lines of ants. And he had so much loving kindness that there's a tortoise released on the monastery property one day, and it just wandered straight up to his kuti in front of his door and just waited, just looking at the door, just waiting for him. Just an astounding man. So if we can cultivate this act of giving, we give ourselves a very powerful and practical way to manifest the brahmaviharas. And in our sort of isolated society, there are different ways we do this, but it can be hard to know how to do it every day in little and small ways, or big and little ways. So I think there's powerful practices for this. In Sri Lanka, there's a practice called the Saraniya practice, where the monastics or the lay people determine to not eat until they've given something to someone to eat. And I think this is better taken on in terms of dinner for people these days. It's hard to find someone early in the morning, but it's a great practice. And I know various people in my life who've taken it on for a time and been very surprised by the connections that come just out of these handing something to someone on the street or bringing a plate of cookies to a neighbor, just the power of that act and making it a daily thing. And I think if that was really taken on for a month, concretely, daily, it would have the potential to change someone's life significantly. And the other way is, the beauty of the Buddha's teaching is that the quintessential element is always intention. And if every act is used as every movement into duality, every approach to the world and to others is approached as a gift, then we can really use all these opportunities as a chance to shape ourselves into better tools for compassion and giving and love. And so often this doesn't take the form of in a circumstance deciding between the good and the bad option, because most of us have conduct refined enough that we know which is which. But so often after beginning to practice, the metric becomes much more the metric of beautiful and unbeautiful. You know that if someone doesn't, you find a family member's laundry in the dryer, you're not just going to throw it on the floor or something. You might put it in a basket and put yours in. Right and wrong that way, and I doubt many would, just scatter it onto the tiles. But if one can go the extra mile and turn it into something beautiful and actually fold the laundry carefully and stack it neatly and bring it to the person's room, that's the real choice for us, is beautiful and unbeautiful. And that if one does that little bit extra on every one of those daily acts, that's what changes the act from a rote habit to a gift. So instead of just, making the bed for, your spouse or something, I don't know, laying a flower on the pillow, something silly, or a mint, bringing them some coffee, like doing, these little teeny bits of extra effort have the ability to, throughout our lives, if placed carefully, turn all these things into gifts, but it takes the little bit of extra effort. And so often, though, the cultivating room for these brahmaviharas comes just in the form of restraining the negative actions and thought patterns that prevent that love from manifesting. So, Ajahn Chah used to say that everyone talks about wanting to do the good, but it's much more, it's important to give up evil first, that's the order that it's given in the Ovada Patimokkha, the heart of the Buddhist teachings. Not doing any evil, the cultivation of the good, to purify one's mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. And I remember this one story of Ajahn Chah where this gangster kingpin from Rayong, where I ordained, actually, the city, who was in charge of the whole drug trade down there, went and visited Ajahn Chah sort of in a burst of faith and converted completely. And Ajahn Chah kept him living under his kuti for about a week or 2 weeks. And the man was so moved by that he decided he would take on the 5 precepts with absolute purity. And he knew that this would mean his death. Like, he'd go back, and he was deep enough in the trade that if he wasn't knocking off people in Rayong repeatedly, he would be displaced and killed, and he knew that. So he went back, and he had enough time before all these things came to fruition that he had time to kind of set up his family in a safe place, to make sure all the people he loved were cared for. But he knew he was going to die because he was going to hold the 5 precepts so carefully. And he did. He was killed. And yet he'd set out to give a gift of such profound purity to himself and those he loved. And this is what sila, morality, is called, is abhaya dana. It's the supreme gift. It's a gift of fearlessness, because those around you know that you will not lie, you will not steal, you will not do any of these things. And that's a huge gift. So that's just the quality of restraint, and how that creates room for loving kindness to manifest in a very practical way with a certain amount of teeth. You know, it's easy to talk about spreading loving kindness and then go and kind of, go out to the bar and this or that, and kind of fudge the truth here and there. But if you really, understand the power of restraint and of pure sila in that way, then it's a powerful surrender of everything you've known, and yet it can really open the door for these higher states to manifest in a way that they wouldn't otherwise. And in the West, we have a clear picture that internal inclination affects external action. We like someone, so we give them something. We have faith, so we give. What we've lost in much of our culture is the understanding that external action affects internal inclination. And that's the power of ritual, is that if every morning, right when you wake up, the first thing you do is you bow to something. I mean, if you have a Buddha image that you have faith in, wonderful. If it's a picture of Nelson Mandela or someone or a word that you have faith in, then wonderful. But something that embodies those ideals for you. I know someone who took the picture of the political leader who he disliked the most and put that on his shrine, because that person was his teacher in loving kindness every day. And I think that's a great idea. Maybe below the Buddha, well below. But if you find yourself, if that's how you begin and end your day, then over time, your heart will change direction, because we all worship something, whether we think we do or not, and we all bow to something. It's how we align our lives. And to make that explicit, that's the role of ritual. Because we have our rituals. We watch football. That's absurd. Like, what is that? It's a ritual, a gigantic ritual. We've lost our gods, and that's why the Marvel movies are so popular. We've replaced them. What's on the highest shelf of most houses is the liquor. What looks most like the shrine is the big screen TV. We have our rituals and we have our gods. So make beautiful in your life what deserves to be beautiful, and bow to it repeatedly. And that's worth something. So that amount of ritual is important. And then setting aside a day a week that is dedicated to practice, and reorienting yourself and cultivating that inner wealth. I mean, the Buddha set down these very powerful, skillful means for cultivating the heart, and one of them was the Sabbath day, and taking on the 8 precepts for that day, where you step back from entertainment and turn off the phone. These are powerful ways to reorient ourselves, and you just tell the people in your life, like, this is my day of practice. I put aside for this day. You turn off the phone. And then stepping into monasteries, and people don't realize how many beautiful places of refuge and practice there are in the world nearby. I mean, for free. Up in Vancouver, BC, there's Birken Monastery, where for many months of the year you can just go and stay for as long as you want for no cost. And Servasti Abbey over in Newport, north of Spokane, they'll take you in. There's some costs associated with certain monasteries, but many of them are free. Abhayagiri is completely free. And, just to take that time and reorient, I mean, that sort of quietness is so helpful for these subtle states to manifest, and for this internal wealth that allows the brahmavihara's power to accumulate. And then there's the actions of how we interact with those. Ajahn, the abbot of Abhayagiri, has a practice where he'll go into the workshop and he has a practice of making the dirtiest place the cleanest place. And I think that's what Ajahn Chah says too, is where, you look at where it's, if it's bad, let it die. If it doesn't die, make it good. And, there's so many people we find it quite easy to spread loving kindness to. And yet frequently our lesson lies hidden in the few people who we really, really can't. And that's where the real teaching is hidden. And Jung says this: we miss God because we don't look low enough. Ajahn Pasana says we miss peace because we look past it. So finding that person that if they just got out of your way, you would have tons of metta. If they just weren't there, this would be really easy. And that person is your teacher. And that's where you have the most powerful practice. So in those cases, the brahmaviharas don't manifest frequently as these sort of high states of, refined love. Frequently they're just working with aversion, and that's enough. And the great thing is the Buddha gave such robust techniques for doing just that. So one wonderful sutta is called the Agata Vinaya Sutta, and he speaks about how if one has someone difficult in one's life, one tries to spread loving kindness to them, metta, compassion, karuna, karuna, equanimity, upekkha. You'll note that he skips mudita, because I think he knows that's asking a lot for you to rejoice in someone's happiness when you really don't like them. So he gives the first three, and then he says, if that doesn't work, don't bring the person to mind. Reflect that they're the inheritors of their actions. And if that doesn't work, just don't bring them to mind. And that's such a relief for people sometimes in the West to think about, is like, so often, I know this seems to go against what I just said, but like, in some cases, if you're really not ready to approach someone who you just can't forgive, and they're not in your life, then it's okay for that time to really not bring them to mind until, you can approach their recollection with care. And Ajahn Sona sort of recommends, you write their name on a piece of paper and you put it in an envelope and you just put it away for 6 months. And for those 6 months, you don't have to think about them. You bring it out later and see if you're ready. Ajahn Sona also reflects that if you can't spread loving kindness to someone, spread it to their chair. I like that. And the Buddha has another Agata Vinaya Sutta, number 2, the dispelling of anger, where he says that you should look at someone in your life with impure bodily conduct, impure verbal conduct, as a man walking along the road would act when encountering an old piece of cloth with a bit of clean cloth on it, like a bit of clean spot, and how that person would use their feet to rip the clean from the dirty piece and to pick up the clean piece. And so one finds the goodness in someone if one can. And that one should approach someone who is impure in bodily conduct, but impure in speech, but pure in bodily conduct, as one would approach a pond covered with algae, and carefully clearing away the algae, bend down and sip and drink. So one clears away the bad insofar as one can, so one can touch the good. One should approach one impure in speech and impure in body, but with occasional moments of clarity and mindfulness, as a man coming across a hoof print filled with water would, bending down and carefully sipping so that as not to disturb the silt on the bottom. So with a lot of care to not disturb or aggravate that person, you approach and you take what you can in terms of seeing and relishing their goodness. And people sense that. one should approach someone impure in bodily conduct, impure in verbal conduct, and without occasional moments of clarity or mindfulness, as one would look at a starving, dying man wandering through the desert. And one should approach someone pure in verbal and bodily conduct with mindfulness and wisdom, as one would approach a green oasis. So, all this to say that the Buddha gives all these means for, and admonitions to really try to work with those difficult people in our lives. And one of the most powerful means I've had is, usually there's one or two people who really your defilements have sort of chosen to push against. And the most powerful means I've ever had, the recollection is to look at that person as one's teacher. And in the Mahayana, they have a conception of the bodhisattvas that these sort of celestial bodhisattvas can send down incarnations of themselves to teach you. And that person can be the drunk on the side of the street, or your boss, or a situation. And whether or not that's true literally, it's certainly a powerful tool to look at the world that way. So I talk sometimes about a monk I lived with who constantly admonished me for the smallest things, whether it was, how I closed the door or not quite wiping the dust off the desk perfectly enough, just constantly. And initially that was annoying. And yet after a while I realized that if this was a great teacher admonishing me in this way, I would take it as a profound opportunity to refine my mindfulness, to humble myself, to practice patience. So why can't I just take this monk that way as my teacher? And so I did. And that year, that was perhaps the biggest teaching I've had was that monastic. And, really working to take it as a teaching. And we had conversations, we parsed out our dynamics. And yet at the same time, it was so meaningful to have that. And to really consciously give gifts to those people in your life, to cultivate as much love as you can. And I ended up with a good relationship, and I still send gifts every now and again to him. So can you really look at those people as your teachers? Can you take it as that? There's a story of the first teacher who took Buddhism to Tibet, and he'd heard that all the Tibetans were unbelievably kind and nice, so he took his kind of annoying chaiwala with him so that he'd have someone to sort of push his buttons and practice with. And there's the famous story, who was it, Mom? Gurdjieff? Okay, was he Sufi in Europe?
Yeah, outside of Paris.
Oh yeah, so his sitting group, and many of you have heard this story, was sort of burdened by one extremely difficult character. And one day they just got fed up and all the people chased him out. And as soon as the teacher came back, he asked where the man had gone, and they're like, we just had enough of him. And he's like, no, go get him. I pay him to be here to teach you all. And so, it's a strange way of looking at things, but it works absolutely. And it's been the most reliable recollection for me, the most reliable tool for overcoming anger. So, frequently this laying the basis for the brahmaviharas to manifest, just these first two of the 10 paramitas, metta and upekkha, loving kindness and equanimity, come at the very end. That's number 9 and number 10. But those first two of dana and sila, giving and morality, that's the basis. And that's to deal with external action, and it's practicable and practical. And it's, we can look down at these things as simple, but they're not. One of Ajahn Chah's teachers, Ajahn Tongrat, his teacher his whole practice for a long time was to hold the 5 precepts absolutely purely in body, speech, and mind. And that was enough for him to become enlightened. And that, in terms of being absolutely honest with himself and all that. And to not engage in intoxicating thoughts at all, things like this. And if we can embody that in our lives, then it's, we don't know how far that realm of sila, of morality, can take us. And over time, that deep sense of self-worth and well-being will grow, and that brightness of heart lends itself to feeling like one has genuinely something to give. And to value the practice and realize that when you step away from those who are familiar with you and know you to go practice at home, when you leave the dinner party early, when you go on retreat, when instead of going on a bike ride with a friend, you come to a Saturday or Sunday day long, many of them will look at it as you stepping away from them, but you can recollect that it is the biggest gift you can give them, because people do not need another person to go on a bike ride with, and they do not need someone to go on a coffee date with. They have enough of those. The world is filled with people that can do that for them. What people need is someone in their life who's taking real steps towards a higher purpose beyond the transitory elements in life which decay and depart and fall away. And as a monastic, you see this dynamic played out in stark relief, in that you step away from everyone you've ever known, and many are hurt and angry. And it's hard to explain to them that you're doing it because it's the only thing you know to do as a gift. And then you come home 5 years later, and many don't understand, and many have lost interest, and many are still angry. But then there's a few who've gotten cancer, and there's a few who've lost their loved ones, and there's a few who just for some other reason understand suddenly what it means and what you've been pointing to and what you've stepped towards. And the fact that someone in their life has done that is everything. So in terms of manifesting love at its deepest level, having one of Plato's prisoners in that cave turn their head towards the light is the biggest gift you can give. And that's why it's so helpful to recollect whenever you sit that this is not for you, it's for everyone in your life. That this is not a selfish act, that this whole path, even the parts that seem like it's turning inward, is in fact you manifesting the brahmaviharas, those 4 boundless abodes, in the most pure way you can, and making yourself into a better tool for them. Because only by cultivating an inner wealth and a happiness that is not fragile and dependent on externals can we be solid enough that we actually have something to give, and can we stop feeding on those around us and give them a true love, which is liberative. So yes, we meditate, we touch our own suffering, we learn to come to calm and brighten the mind. In meditation, when we're able, we cultivate this loving kindness daily as much as we can, using a variety of skillful means. And then externally in our lives, we cultivate clear morality, a sense of purpose, and giving as much as we can as a framework for these sort of lighter notes of loving kindness to manifest in. And if we do that, then we find that our life has become a blessing to us and others. And that's our ultimate goal as human beings. So I wish you all the best in that. So we have about 20-ish minutes to do a bit of discussion if people want to talk for a bit. And then we can walk and sit and continue. We can discuss anything, it can be on the practice or what we talked about, or just stuff people have on their minds.
So I apologize for coming in late. I misread the schedule, but you referred to one stage you kept strictly the first 5 precepts, and it's probably not possible to actually keep them completely, you know, I can't walk. It depends on, for instance, to not kill. Well, there are bacteria in the soil.
Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Jatana is the key element always. I mean, this was a debate in the Buddhist time too. The Jains thought that it was to do with bodily action, which is why they always swept the path in front of them. And the Buddha was always like, it's intention, it's intention.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, go on, Tom. There may be more.
Well, you know, so we have what, to not kill, to not lie, to not steal, to not take intoxicants so as to do heedlessness, and to not engage in sexual misconduct. And we've had discussions of that too. You know, I'm not sure about to not kill intentionally. And there's another aspect of that too, is that sometimes I've heard that stated as to do no harm to sentient beings. And then there was a debate about what's a sentient being. and then I found in the Avatamsaka Sutra, a Mahayana text from China, that they pretty much define sentient beings as entities that are capable of self-reflection and change. That just leaves humans. You know, so that means it's okay to kill anything but a human.
Yeah. Maybe the occasional dolphin would fall into that, but not many.
Sorry?
Maybe the occasional dolphin would also make the cut, but
yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, or maybe you could attribute that to some higher primates and other mammals. Yeah. But it's just, and when I hear categorical statements, I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question around this, and the realm of sea life. I mean, that's Ajahn Tongrat. It was interesting because you know how so Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage, you might know this, is sort of expanded each of those precepts to be much more inclusive. Like the precept against taking intoxicants is expanded to like avoiding intoxicating media and stuff.
Yeah, we had a study group with my Sangha, and we used his and others as reference. So yeah.
Do you have any other? Do you know any of the other expansions?
Bernie Glassman's group had an elaboration on them, like Thich Nhat Hanh did, but I don't remember the specifics.
Me neither. But you know, but I mean, sort of like doing no harm to sentient beings, and I think that's sort of what that specific teacher was referring to in Ajahn Tongrat's case was like, taking that no lying to the extreme of like, how does every thought in your mind be completely honest kind of thing, and how do you do no harm? And I think that's a beautiful place to take the precepts. And what I've heard as the danger in articulating the precepts in that way at their basis is that by making them non-categorical, there is this room for kind of their intentions, you know, and because you were going to have intoxicating media probably in a life, it's really hard to totally step away from that, and so they sort of become these large intentions, which I think are beautiful, but I think the Buddha really had a place also in him saying that, you know, he was so clear, like, these are your roots of your humanity. One who compromises these compromises their humanity. And I understand the beauty of having those be very categorical, in that it means a lot when, you know, even, you know, you don't always have to speak the truth to someone you care about, you know, like in terms of, there's time when it's not skillful to say everything you mean, you know, and like Ajahn Jeff says, everyone looks good in a dress compared to if they weren't wearing a dress or something like that, you know, but it means a lot when your loved one can look at you and say, did you cheat on me? And you can say no. And they know that's 100% true. I mean, that means so much. And so I think that's the beauty of the precepts being categorical and somewhat limited, in that you can actually live a life where you don't lie. You can do it. People do. And if that's categorical, then there's real power there. But then I think those recollections of expanding them into these sort of broader intentions are amazing. Like, gosh, however far you can take those, amazing, you know. And I think you're right to be skeptical of many categorical statements. But but I think the 5 precepts are, they're pretty much in there. And obviously the one that's always a little like, it's a glass of wine, you know, and fair enough, you know, it's sort of like, there's way worse things you can do. But I think there is something really powerful about, like, if you're a kid and your parent has a glass of beer, like, you notice, like, there's something different. It changes them a little bit. I remember that clearly. Sorry. Sorry, it wasn't that bad. But just to say that, and just when you realize the preciousness in that samsaric scope of this ability of mindfulness of humans, I think the Buddha really held it as sacred, you know, like, you don't compromise that. And anyways, not to say like people have glasses of wine, it's okay. It happens, you know, it's part of the world we live in. And yet if one can hold those 5 precepts purely, what a beautiful thing, you know.
Yeah. Oh, no, I have taken 10 precepts, and from time to time I do remember that they're important in my life. It's just not, I haven't got the monastic
no, it's good
attitude, I suppose.
No, you seem to do just fine, Tommy, and like, also I probably shouldn't have said it's fine, but it's, you know, it's good.
Well, it's intentional. Yeah, I was more questioning how literal the teaching is from the Theravadan point of view.
Yeah.
Intention is what it's all about.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and then you get into whole things about supply chain dynamics and stuff, and yeah, you can go a long way with all that stuff.
Supply chain dynamics.
Yeah, like if you buy meat,
Yeah.
things like that, and those are really relevant points for how we feel about ourselves and our actions in the world. And yet, the Buddha said also there's a very particular scarring of the heart that comes from killing and being yourself.
Yeah, the Dalai Lama eats meat.
Yeah.
His doctors told him to, but it's tradition in Tibet. That's how you had nutrition.
Yeah, and the Buddha didn't forbid the monks from doing it because he knew that we'd have to go into places where that's what people ate, you know. In the Tibetan highlands, it's pretty hard to grow food, you know, so. Do people have other things they'd like to talk about?
Well, so do intentions supersede then the precepts? And, you know, for instance, death with dignity, okay, do not kill. I mean, the intention there is humane euthanasia, which is also something I happen to do as a veterinarian. So,
yeah,
you know, where do you put that? The intention is one of being humane.
yeah. Yeah, it's the intention does affect the action a lot, I think. You know, like, sort of killing with the intention of alleviating suffering or protecting would be a different karmic flavor than one out of anger, you know. And those precepts were, you know, in the Buddhist, in sort of that Theravadan view, it's like those actions do, you know, they are all under that first precept, you know. Yeah, but it's certainly like, that's a difficult realm to talk about. It's true. And I think the intention does flavor things a lot too, you know.
So I wonder if you allow me, along that line, so a long time ago, when Lion's Roar magazine was Shambhala's son, there was an article there about euthanasia of pets when they had become really old and infirm. And I forget who the author was, but he or she argued that you could not do that morally because you can't know another being suffering. Now, a friend of mine just put down her dog. Dr. Marone came over to our house and administered the sedative in her while the dog was in her lap. And that animal was clearly suffering. So I wonder if you have an understanding, you know, this idea about can we perceive suffering or not? Did I read a bogus article?
No, it sounds right. I mean, well, let me think. I feel like it's too personal to go into here, you know, and yet, yeah, the Buddhist idea would be, I think that, you know, being suffering, you know, it's yeah, that even, yeah, it all falls under the first precept, and it's, yeah. But I don't, it's too personal to go into in this context, I think, in this sort of group context, you know, it's difficult to parse out, and that's something that, you know, in a profession you'll have to work with and all that, but I can just say kind of the Buddhist perspective on it a bit, and yeah, and without, the least bit of judgment or anything like that, you know, it's just, in the Buddhist view, that is, you know, it all falls under that, you know, and even if the intention colors it, yeah. And I'd be happy to talk more about it in another context, but it's too personal to talk about with like this many people, you know, unless people really want to go into it more, but I don't think so. Because I think we've all, I mean, I put, you know, as a layman, we put down our dog too, you know, I think it's fairly common.
Well, it's not only just animals. I was also speaking in the context of now that humans have that choice to ask and have their suffering ended.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard with the Buddhist worldview around, I mean, I do feel more comfortable talking about death with dignity a little bit, just because it's, the karmic weight of that is perhaps, you know, significant. It's such that maybe it's worth just saying, yeah, like, in the Buddhist worldview, that the preciousness of that rebirth as a human, and those moments of clarity, even if it's, you know, that moment of feeling the pain of sickening to the point where you sort of let go more and more of life, you know, to the point where you really let go, because suffering at the end of life sometimes has that quality, you know. It's, you read about Tolstoy kind of writing about Prince Alexander as he sort of fades, and how his like gaze looks farther and farther into, you know, what they say, 1,000-foot stare in a 10-foot room, and these moments of clarity that manifest at the end of people's lives. I mean, a lot of people talk about that, hospice nurses, like how you, you know, someone have dementia, and then at the end of their life, suddenly these bursts of clarity out of nowhere, and the person will just be right there, and just how precious it is in these worlds to be surrounded by people who love you, and that you sort of, even if someone doesn't show it, sometimes they're soaking that up, you know, sometimes maybe that's worth a lot to have that around them, and that there's something kind of very sacred about that. So yeah, certainly you don't have to sustain a life forever, you know, on life support and stuff, but the actual act of taking it, the Buddha sort of said there was a certain scarring that happens then. So death with dignity is, you know, by the Theravada worldview and the Buddhist worldview, it's sort of, it wouldn't really be supported. Yeah, and I'm sensitive about how, you know, these are very personal issues, and they, you know, it's not for, you know, it should be spoken of more gently and as much as possible, and I'm very conscious of the difficulty of doing that in a context like this, not knowing everyone's history. You know, but I have an obligation as a monk to also say where this stands in the Buddhist worldview. So
just anecdotally, I mean, that's my experience being with my sister. She died. There was that point where she looked in my eyes and said, "Okay, I'm ready to go." And shortly thereafter, she did. And it was something I didn't understand. And I will say, and this is very, very personal, having witnessed that, I made an intention that if there was anything I could do to not do that, die in an ICU, intubated, and then have it, you know, told that if I saw my end was imminent, that I'd take the off-ramp for that. And I'll just say thank you, because this is the first time that's been challenged. And that's what I appreciate about the precepts, what I appreciate about the practice are those times when I feel pushback. Now that's too hard. Now I can justify that away. I can, if I just reframe, I can categorize. Maybe I can. There's a way around whichever of the precepts, and I don't. My intention is not to judge others about that, but to notice that when that arises inside of me, to say, now you've hit the real thing. Now you've hit that place where the path was easy up to this point, and now here's the challenge. Here's the contentious person that challenges you. Here's that thing that surely not that. Surely I don't have to do whatever. And I just bring it up just because, thank you, that was very personal and very intimate, and now I'll consider that for a while. And fortunately I'm not there, right, that I know of, but wow, having gone through that and having lost
And
6 people in 16 months, that was a lot of experience with death.
Was this case that they were on life support and it was pulled, kind of?
She had a brain tumor, terminal brain cancer, and there was a point where they removed the tube. She was being supported to breathe, and then, expired.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd say that, in this case, sort of not sustaining a life artificially is not necessarily considered the same as actually killing, in the terms of the precepts. Not continuing, this is a hard realm to talk about, but, intentionally kind of injecting a poison would be different than those things. And also, there's been moments in, it's, I know at Abhayagiri they had anyways, I don't feel comfortable talking about it much more, but if there's no specific questions I can try, but it's, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, please.
Better take her.
Well, mine was more, and I don't know if this is tangential or not, but I thought that the Death with Dignity movement, you have to be in shape to be able to administer your own. No?
Whoa.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess in some states by law you do, but some states no.
Not here.
I was wondering, because there is a Death with Dignity movement here. Huh. I didn't know that, Michelle, thank you. Oof.
So, could you, same topic, but just a little different direction. Maybe I think that it's easy to fall into sort of the Judeo-Christian template for morality of good and evil. Is there a difference between that? Because it seems like almost when I've talked with you about this before, it's euthanizing somebody is almost more like there could be an opportunity of immense value that's being lost in those last days, weeks, whatever of life. And so it seems, I've always taken, but maybe I'm just doing my own little mental massaging of it as different from sort of the Judeo-Christian, this is good and this is evil, and that it's like a whole different way of thinking about morality there. Am I wrong, or?
I know that Ajahn and Jeff would say, the kind of paradigm of you do something and then something punishes you. It's not like that, but it's more the Buddha talked about these laws of how cause and effect works, which is, you stick your hand in a fire and it burns. It's not that the fire is punishing you for sticking your hand in the fire, and similarly, and this is the Buddha's teaching is a working hypothesis. That's what faith means in the Buddha's conception is all right, I buy in this enough that I'm willing to give it a try. And then you see when you meditate after you fudged the truth or spoke in a way that wasn't perfect or hurts something, it's hard for the mind to calm down. Like restlessness and remorse are the same hindrance. You know, like the mind won't settle because it has to avoid acknowledging something that it knows wasn't deeply in line with it. And so yeah, there is this conception though of something, you know, of a deep intuition somewhere profoundly deep in us, that's sort of the Dhamma, you know, talking in a sense, or guiding, or, you know, that certain actions are somehow out of line with our deepest direction and potential. And that when we engage in those, it really can make it difficult to achieve awakening. And I think that's the big thing, is sort of like, it's not like, you know, if you want to do these things, it's fine. It's up to you. But if the goal is awakening and a calm mind and these really refined states of concentration, then the Buddha's saying like, these actions are going to get in the way. And some of that we understand immediately, like, you know, you can see what happens when you lie and stuff, and how that feels, and how it makes it hard to settle down in meditation afterwards. I mean, you know how it feels to be regretful in meditation. And then some of them are a little more esoteric and outside of our cultural understanding of, like, the Buddha saying, like, the taking of a life, actually there's a particular scarring that's sort of there, and it's hard to talk about, but it's difficult. So that's a bit more on faith, I think. And then, yeah, there's sort of the opportunity, like just that sacredness of life. And I know I read about this, it's fun, I read about a medium who'd like remembered a past life, I think, and for the, no, it's too much.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, she was talking, it's just, I'm aware not everyone believes in rebirth, so, but anyway, she was talking about how she remembered a past birth where she lived to like 3 years old and then died in the bombing of London. And she's like, why did I have that life? And she was like, she reflected that she'd had this unbelievably loving parents in those lives, and that the love that she'd kind of been part of in that life and how it had absorbed in her had sustained her through the beginning of this new life, despite its difficulties. And so I don't think we always know, like, yeah, it means a lot to be even in a hospital bed. Granted, I'd like to avoid the ICU, and this whole issue's gotten a lot more complicated since pacemakers came into the picture and stuff, you know, but, and I think it's good to take precautions to not be in that situation. But being surrounded, in the whole scope of samsara and the Buddhist worldview, being in a hospital bed surrounded by people that love you for a few months is a rare moment of blessing, even if it's filled with suffering, you know, because to be loved like that, you know, who knows what effects that has in someone's heart. And the potential for mindfulness to manifest is also sacred, you know. So yeah, it's not like you're being punished, but it's also like, this is what the mind needs to calm and release. And you only, you know, part of it's so active confidence in the Buddha's teaching to kind of take it on faith enough to test it out. But you never know until awakening.
So it's a sutta that talks about the fire consuming wood. What is that? What's the origin of that?
Gosh.
The flame?
The flame.
There's wait, do you know, Mark?
Hmm?
Do you know?
No, you had used that illustration this morning.
Yeah, the flame. Yeah, there's, what is it? It's, Vajragota Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 152. And Vajragota asks the Buddha, when someone's released, where do they go? You know, do they exist? Do they not exist? Do they both exist and not exist? Do they neither exist nor not exist? The quadrilemma, as it's known. And the Buddha says, exist does not apply. Does not exist does not apply. And then Vajragota says, what are you talking about? And the Buddha says, you know, if you have this flame and it, you know, goes out, do you say it went to the north, the south, the east, or west, and Vajrayoga's like, that does not apply. And the Buddha says, similarly, when one is released, these terms don't apply. And so this is one of that sort of image of fire clinging, because that's the essence of what he's talking about, is release from craving and clinging. And so, yeah, so that's one instance. And then there's many others where the Buddha kind of talks about, the fire being dependent on its fuel and things like that. So, yeah, the metaphor of fire comes up a lot, burning with the fire of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, I think that's the time we have for questions. I'm really sorry if I spoke unskillfully at all in this, and don't, destroy yourself over these things. And like, there's been instances, I know at Abhayagiri they had I'm sorry, we live in a difficult realm, and rarely do we live it perfectly. And the Buddha gave us the precepts to really, really try to make us live it as beautifully as we could towards awakening. And we do our best, so good luck.
That's how you're ending.